So, welcome and thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen. So the title is, Did Christianity Survive the Arab Conquest? Okay? As he said in the introduction, there is a controversy over the subject, and I'm trying to put together some recent developments to put forward my idea on the subject. Let's have some highlights of the controversy, a recap. The Arab period is normally taken to be from 869, when they invaded these islands and threw the Byzantines out, until 1091, when Count Roger I came to the island. The first important publication about the subject is Al-Himyari, which Joseph Brincat found to have been published already on the continent, but he made it available in Malta. And as a conclusion of Al-Himyari's account, the islands were depopulated in 869, that is when the Arabs threw the Byzantines out. They left nobody on the island and left it in ruin until 1048, when there was a settlement of a colony from Sicily. And this is the 1048 is confirmed from various other sources, Ibn al-Athir and Muwairi, etc. Wettinger had already been preaching his ideas for many years, and when he got this book in his hand, he confirmed the idea, and rightly so. If there was no population, if there was an ethnic break, then there must have been a break in Christianity. If there were no people, no Christians, so there were no Christians for about 180 years, between 869 and 1048. I wrote about this, and I think that the depopulation hypothesis has been debunked, mainly after a paper I wrote with Martin Zamid in Merita Classica. I will not go into the details of that. It's not the subject of today's. But then afterwards, there was a major breakthrough with the publication of Monsignor Gozo, myself, and Horatio Vella in 2010, which we published this Greek poem of more than 4,000 verses, written definitely in the mid-11th century. And that's the starting point of it all. This is the book Tristia ex merito gaudo, lament in Greek verse of a 12th century exile on Gozo. There is discussion about Gozo, but does merito gaudo, ex merito gaudo, mean Gozo? Does it mean Malta? Does it mean Malta and Gozo? The thing is that the Greek names, composite names of this kind, 99% of them, the nominal part, the noun, is the second part. And this is a qualifying adjective to it. So, for example, you say Heliopolis. Polis is city, Helios is sun, so it is the city of the sun. So the first part is adjectival, the second part is nominal. That's 99% in Greek toponyms and names and nouns. And this is also the case in Sanskrit. We've gone into this with Martin Zamid. But there are the odd exceptions. I can mention Samothraki, for example, which is Samos of Thrace. It's the other way around. But these are very, very few. And from the context, some people said this is Malta and Gozo. But we'll see about this. That's a facsimile of one of the pages. In this poem, there is that Roger II attacked Melite Gaudos. He came with some archers with him and a few machines, and he attacked Melite Gaudos. And in brief, it asserts the following. Attack by Roger II on Melite Gaudos in 1127. 11, it's important to remember the date. 1127. This is confirmed from other sources. He exiled, first of all, we know that there was, in 1091, Roger I came, so something happened in between. And in my last book on the tithes of the church, I suggested that the Normans wanted to acquire more land from the Arabs that were still on the island when Roger I, after Roger I left. He did not throw the people out. Okay, the Arabs were still there. But that's an idea, that's a hypothesis, okay? But Roger II came to quell another insurrection in 1127. He exiled the sheikhs and all their possessions, and most importantly, he discovered a Christian community around its episcopos, its bishop. Let's make a little concession. This could have been a protopapas. It is known that in small places around the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Church located a protopapas rather than a full-scale bishop. Anyway. We also found that there was a break of the Pact of Old with the Muslims, a Dhimma kind of pact. There was conversion of mosques into churches, and Roger II founded a living for the priests who had been worshipping from their ancestors. So a call back for years. Anyway, well, some people didn't like this. There were points of controversy. For example, Charles Dudley, in a public discussion soon after the publication of the book in the Curia, Wettinger gave a lecture at Castile in 2011. There was a review by Kurisheva and Filippov in Russian, Moscow. There were reviews by Zaglas in the Jahrbuch Erster Reichischen Byzantinistik. Brincart has a review in Vilsina. David Frendo of Ireland reviewed it in Galicia. And most important, Lauksterman wrote a paper, a damning paper actually, in the same journal. And his ideas were stated here in Malta by Jeremy Johns. He was giving a lecture about a different document, the 1198 document of Constanza, and he added a tail end saying what Lausterman had said. Now, one of the objections was that this was a poem, 40,000 plus verses of poetry. Can you write history in poetry? And we objected, said, of course. In the book of Judges, for example, chapters 4 and 5 are written in verse. Homer, Iliad and Odyssey are definitely verse. Empedocles, 5th century BC, is in verse. Beowulf, 8th century. Theodosius, the Expugnatio Cretae, 10th century. William of Apulia, the Chronicon, and the Carmen Pisanorum, and the Carmen Petri Debula are all in verse, and they all narrate history, no one objects to that. And also a 12th century last will and testament published in 1542 was written in verse. Why not? What does Melite Gaudos mean? This is a repetition of what I said before. No doubt about the identification of the name with the Maltese archipelago. no doubt about that. It's Malta and Gozo, Gozo and Malta, something like that. To distinguish it from another Kaudos, remembered in the Acts of the Apostles, Paul went past the island of Kaudos, south of Crete, before embarking on the terrible journey that you know all about. As I said, 99% of Greek and Sanskrit toponyms are of this form. A few instances can be cited to mean either that, or either Malta associated with Gozo, or Malta and Gozo. So much for that. The main bone of contention, as I said, is Laukstermann's rereading of folio 84 verses 14-15. I have to mention some of the Greek. The Greek is Eusebeis de tu topu oiketoras, deiknusi sun episkopo. The verb deiknumi means, the primary sense is to show. Okay? According to Laukstermann, he, and for him it's George of Antioch rather than Roger, selected deiknusi. Instead of showing, he selected pious settlers for this place, together with a bishop, as if there was nothing, and he brought with him on his campaign someone who he made a bishop of Malta. In our reading of Tristia, he, Count Roger, not George of Antioch, brought out into the open the pious inhabitants of the place, together with the bishop. That is, they were there. Laukstermann and co. say they brought them with them. There was no Christianity before 1127. This is the main bone of contention of controversy. So what we're saying is, Roger II discovered a hidden church. Now, I think we refuted, when I say we, it's not pluralized majestatis, it's because Monsignor Busutir had passed away, and myself and Horatio Vella published two papers, one locally, you can see the details here, Truth Vindicated, Tristia ex merito gaudo in Merita Plastica, 2015, and a paper in Vilnius University. We entitled this Reactions to Tristia ex merito gaudo, a response. And the reason why we published this in Vilnius, in Lithuania, rather than in Österreich, where the original paper was written, because they refused to publish our response. So we went to another university. Anyway, to date, as far as I know, no one has come out against what these two papers assert. As far as I know, nothing came out. Now, the gist of these two papers, of our arguments, are two. One, a philological refutation, looking at the Greek, which is not discussed here, of course, and historical facts about the Latin episcopacy of the See of Malta. So these two main arguments. And this evening we'll talk about, this morning we'll talk about the second one. Now, in the original discussion with Charles Dudley in the Curia, which I must say I had published a leaflet in response to what had been said already in the papers, and I gave this copy to Charles Dudley. I didn't hear from him. I thought he had to give me his thing so I could prepare myself, but he gave me nothing. At any rate, I mentioned this argument. I said, in Malta, there were two bishops, Ioannes in February 1113, and Reinaldus in 1121. If Malta already had two bishops before 1127, then Roger II or whoever could not have implanted a church in Malta in 1127. That's the main argument. But since this does not seem to have cut any ice with skeptics, recently I decided to delve deeper into this argument. And I published that in 2 papers. One of them about Johannes Bishop in the Festschrift in honor of Maroma Camilleri, okay? And more recently, quite recently, in Medita Theologica, I wrote a massive thing, a 50-page thing, to prove that indeed Reinaldus was Bishop of Malta. To go into that, let's recall that there was a deal between the Pope and the Normans in 1098. Pope Urban II and Count Roger I. And this deal comes under the title of the Legatia Apostolica of 5th July 1098. And this was signed in Troina when there was the establishment of a bishopric there, which eventually got merged with Messina. Pope Urban II, by virtue of this, confers on Count Roger I and his heirs the title of Apostolic Legate, whereby the Normans are to return the lands of Peter usurped by the Muslims to the Holy See. The Muslims overran Sicily and Malta and south of Calabria, and the Pope said these were the lands of Peter which had been given to Rome by the emperors, the early emperors of Christianity, Constantine and so on, and they wanted them back because the Muslims had taken them away. In compensation for this, the Normans were given the right, first, to veto apostolic visitations to the new territory. If the Pope sent a visitor to see how things were going in the south of Italy and Sicily, the Normans had the right to stop them. They had to sanction them. They had the right to nominate bishops to the new Latin sees. They nominated bishops for approval by the Holy See. And this thing is with us to, I don't know today, but till recently. Certainly the knights exercised it, the governors exercised it, and I think also the Maltese government exercised it, having inherited this from Roman times, to appoint, to nominate bishops when there was a vacancy. And this is known as the terna. They present 3 names, and then whoever chooses one of them. But they have this right given them by the Legatia Apostolica. And then they also had the right to endow the bishoprics subject to papal confirmation. They could give them land, and property, etc. The details of these are fully explained in Monsignor Vincent Borges' Merita Sacra, Volume 1. So, what is the upshot of this? The corollary, obvious corollary. Bishops Johannes of 1113 and Reinaldus of 1121 would have been nominated by Roger II himself. If Roger II came here in 1127, he came to a place which was already established as a bishopric. And we had had 2 bishops already nominated by himself, because Roger I died in 1101, and Roger II was the factotum of the time. So how could he have brought with him a bishop and clergy and implanted them in Malta, given that he had already nominated 2 bishops, at least 2 bishops, for these islands. The standard objection raised against these bishops, being bishops of Malta, is the usual one, is that they are claimed to be bishops of Mileto in Calabria. Once Mileto got established as a see, we had a problem. Both Malta and Mileto in Calabria became called Melitensis Militensis. So, the argument here to show that these 2 were actually bishops of Malta is by elimination. They could not have been bishops of Mileto, by showing that in Mileto there was another bishop at the time. In both cases, this is shown to be false. Some remarks on these 2 bishops. For Johannes in 1113, the Calabrians claim Mileto's bishops were, of course there is a conflict here, conflict of interest. The Calabrian historiographers, they went for the documents and established who the bishops of Mileto were. And there are 3 main Calabrian historians of the time, and they agree on, in 1101 there was Robertus de Parisio. Then they put in Hugo in 1104. Then they place Johannes, the Johannes, in 1113, and Gaufridus in 1119. Okay? Now, it is shown by, what's his name? Anyway, you'll find it written down somewhere. Hugo is a misnomer. He wasn't a bishop of, this is shown by someone very, very, very important historian. Okay? Hugo was not a bishop of Mileto. He was an abbas of some, because the word is abbreviated, it's HU. They expanded that into Hugo, when in fact it was Hubertus. And he was abbas of some monastery in Calabria. Robertus de Parisio is identified with a cardinal of that name, so there is no Hugo. Robertus de Parisio, he's identified with a cardinal of this name who survived definitely till 1116. What is this thing about cardinal? Now, the important German historian, what's his name? Anyway, it has 3 volumes. Sorry, my memory is slipping. He showed that the Holy See in Calabria and Sicily was appointing cardinals as bishops for various reasons, to ensure that his power is transmitted correctly. These are his trusted friends, the cardinals, persons of trust, who we call them these days. Okay? So, the appointment of Robertus de Parisio for Mileto just fits into the general picture. But if that is true, then up to 1116, there was someone, and Johannes could not have been a bishop of Mileto. It must be recalled that there's only one single document that talks about Johannes, and that is in the Bibliotheca in Malta. We have the original because it's a parchment related to a donation to the Order of St. John. So it's in the archives of the order. For Reinaldus, the argument is different. his name appears in a list of 51 witnesses to a bull of Calixtus II. So Calixtus II issued a bull. Some claim it is a forgery, but even if it is a forgery, if a forger wants to be believed, then his witnesses must be correct. Otherwise, they would pounce on them. Ah, this is false, so this is false. So this must be true. And this big paper of mine showed that 50 of them, all of them except for the Maltese bishop, were authentic. I showed they actually were active at that time. So common sense says that this little known Bishop of Malta is also authentic. And to confirm that, we know that there was Egalfridus, was Bishop of Mileto in that time. Yes?
Was it customary for the bishops of Malta to reside in Malta or in Sicily?
Or in Sicily, in Lentini. It's only during the time of the Knights that they started to come here. Now, this is the bull of Paschal II, Pie Postulatio Voluntatis, published in full by Maroma Gabineri. And Ego Ioannes Episcopus Melitensis Episcopus Legi et Subscripsi, here is actually more clearly written than the other subscriptions over there. And someone, to pull my leg, said this was included very clearly, a forgery, included later to boost the Christian element of this island. But I showed that there is a copy of this bull of 13 something or other in Spain, and I produced a copy, which also carries that signature. So it could not have been the Knights after coming to Malta who tried to boost the Christian element here. Right. So who then was the Episcopos of 1127? He was not Latin, implanted by Roger II, or worse, by George of Antioch, as in Amsterdam, to found any dioceses. He was Greek, surrounded by a Greek Christian community that had lain underground during the Arab occupation. This is not common, something peculiar to Malta. Compare, for example, Bishop Nicodemus of Palermo was brought out into the open in the same way by Roger I in 1072 when he entered the city. So it's not an odd case. Now we have something new. Last year, Professor Simon Mercia gave a talk in Gozo on 24th June of last year. He was working on a text in collaboration with Franz X. Kassar, a new Arabic text by Al-Khalkashandi, who lived in those times, which says, in brief, the following. Gozitan pirates, described as infidels in a Muslim text, infidels in a Muslim text, therefore Christians, disrupt seafaring merchants and pilgrims on their Hajj. So we have pilgrims and merchants crossing the Mediterranean, and Gozitan pirates pounce on them and work havoc. It had to be corrected. What was I going to say? Yes, of course. All the arguments before did not relate to the faith in the island. This is the first one that actually mentions Christians on the island. Secondly, a Muslim fleet attacks Audesh. Audesh, the word Audesh in Arabic appears 3 times in this document, capturing 440 men, killing the rest, leaving only women on the island. A messenger is sent to inform the authority in Egypt, because al-Khashandi worked for the caliphate in Egypt, and was relating things that related to them, okay? Who sends back his congratulations. So someone came here, attacked Gozo, wrought havoc, and sent message to Egypt saying, we did this, and the other one wrote back congratulating. Some comments. The first obvious comment is, clear dating is lacking. We're not told this was the year, but there is mention of the Muslim pilgrimage, the Hajj, okay, which ended in Mecca in the Levant, okay? So the attacked vessels were going through the Sicilian Channel past the sentinel Gozo. The retaliation implies collaboration between Muslims in the West and those in the East. And this question is discussed by the important historian David Abulafia of Cambridge. Abulafia, I quote him in full. Some degree of economic, the book is The Great Sea, if you have it, it's a thick thing. Some degree of economic, cultural, and religious unity had been achieved along the line linking Spain to Egypt. Despite the sectarian Shia-Sunni and political divisions between the Umayyad of Spain, Fatimid of Egypt, Abbasid before them, despite of this division, the lands of Islam interacted in trade and culture. This was aided by the constant movement of Muslim pilgrims across the Mediterranean to Mecca, just as much by merchants of several faiths. So not only the Muslims, but everybody. And he is basing his conclusions from the Gelizah documents. This is taken after Abulafia, and we produced it here. This was the main port, Almeria, which went here. Sometimes it needed to go to Amalfi, sometimes it needed to go to Mahdia in North Africa, or to Palermo, and past Malta through the Sicilian Channel to either Alexandria or to Constantinople. So who and when attacked this island? Al-Khashandi, written in 1412, is concerned with Egypt, as I said, Egypt and Syria, during 4 distinct periods of Muslim domination. The Ikhshidid, between 935 and 969, the Fatimid, 969 to 1172, the Ayyubid, 1172 to 1250, and the Mamluk, 1250 to 1519. So that's the span of discussion by Al-Khashandi. His magnum opus is a 14-volume encyclopedic manual for chancery clerks, illustrated by various episodes in Egyptian history, one of which concerns Gozo. How about dating? What dates are possible? Excluding possibilities. First, the Western Muslim power that attacked Gozo could only have been one of Al-Andalus, Spain, Sicily, or Ifriqiya, North Africa. We can exclude the existence of Muslims on the island. They were attacking a Christian, not a Muslim. Now we know that the Muslims were here from 1048 for sure, under Roger I, Roger II, under Frederick Swabians, up to his death, 1250. We can exclude all those years, 1048 to 1250, when these islands, the majority of the population was Muslim. Don't forget, we have the census of 1251, which shows that in Malta, for example, the majority were definitely Muslims. By 1250, the Muslims had been expelled to Lucera from Sicily and Malta, as in Aegean, excluding Sicilian intervention after 1250. There were no Muslims anymore after 1250, so we can forget about Sicily. On the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain, historian Hitti writes, it entirely disappeared in 1031. On its ruins arose sundry petty kingdoms, engaged in internecine warfare, small communities fighting each other. They were not, the climate wasn't correct. All of which finally succumbed to the growing power of the native Christians. So Spain, after 1031, you can forget about. With the fall of Granada in 1492, Muslim rule vanished forever. Thus, we can exclude the Spanish Muslim intervention after 1031. We can also exclude North Africa, because its shipping towards Egypt would not go up to Malta, round Malta, through the Channel and to Egypt. It would go along the coast. So, the dating possibilities, furthermore, from looking at the problem from the Maltese angle, furthermore, in confirmation, post-1250 Maltese islands were in a depressed state, reduced to a pawn in inter-Christian struggles for power. The Angevins, the Genoese, the Aragonese, the Venetians in trade. For example, in 1264, the Genoese, using Malta as a base, were attacking the Venetians. In 1274, Gozo was depopulated by the Genoese, 1274. In 1283, we have this picture, Grand Harbour battle for Malta between Aragon and Anjou. In 1297, Malta and Gozo devastated by the Aragonese because the others had attacked Ajaccio in Corsica. And during the 14th century, there was slow recovery, as in Luttrell's paper on Gozo 1335. Conclusion. Kartashandi, Gozo incident probably lies between 935, the beginning of Kartashandi's account, and 1048, as discussed above. What about what's happening in that period? Al-Andalus. The Umayyad, from 756 to 1031, dissolved after 1031 into taifas, as I mentioned before. 1031, 1086, Murad 1086 afterwards. Most likely in that period, the Caliph Abd al-Rahman III, 912 to 961. He brought stability to the Cordoba Caliphate. He invested in an enlarged, renovated fleet based in Almeria, as indicated in Abu Lafia's map, which was the chief harbor. He disputed Fatimid naval supremacy, defeating them at Ceuta, 931, Marsa al-Khabas, 940, and on the coast of Iberia. He came all the way, we know, he came all the way to here. Okay? I conclude that Malta and Gozo were in Christian hands by the 10th century. And for me, that is proof that in the 10th century, these islands were in Christian hands. So, reinterpretation of known events. If there were Christians on these islands, given that Malta and Gozo were in Christian hands during the 10th century, certain events previously attributed to other causes can now be viewed as cross versus crescent episodes. In my paper with Martin Zamit, we're trying to interpret certain events as fighting between Muslim tribes and Berbers. If we now know that these were Christians, then it's Christian against Muslim. That's happened later. For example, around 920, the Fatimid al-Mahdi attacked Malta with the fleet he had inherited from the Aghlabids. 920, hit 618. Was this an attack on Christians? In this context, yes, I would say. In 1039, this is most important, 1039, the army of Malta attacked Jerba, Ibn Idari, discussed in the paper with Martin Zamit. This is the pivotal document, Ibn Idari. And in the year 431, 1040, 3940, the army of Malta entered the island of Jerba, which it conquered, killing several of its people. The army of Malta. So whoever Christian was here was very strong. They had an army big enough to attack Jerba. Remarks. Malta was far from being depopulated before 1048, as often claimed. Malta had an army strong enough to attack Jerba. If you look at Chiarelli, he misinterprets this text to make it dovetail with his hypotheses. He is not correct. So there we are. There's Malta, there's the Channel, there is Jerba down here. Now, can we do better? How archaeology can help, for example. French historian Jacques Godichot, in 1981, claimed that the Arab Tower, which you see here in Fort St. Angelo, was built or rebuilt in the 10th century. So somebody else is saying that in the 10th century it was rebuilt. Simon Mercier produces a text affirming this. He wrote 7 articles in the Malta Independent, 2015, thereabouts, and one of them is this. Encyclopedist Gaetano Moroni actually mentions the year 975 when the tower was built. In volume 42, page 64. It's a 300-volume work. So an archaeological dig in around this tower could help clarify the situation if they put their mind to it. Open questions. There are always open questions. What happened to this Christian population of 1040 when the Muslims came from Sicily to settle in 1048? So there were Christians in 1040, 1048 there was a settlement from Sicily, Muslims. Was there peaceful coexistence? I don't know. Was there a dhimmi type of agreement hinted at by the events of 1127? Does the Pact of Old go back to this rather than to 869 as originally not correctly presumed. How did the Christians behave when the Byzantines attacked in 1053? How does one explain, for example, the find of 923? In the museum, exhibit 23,000, there is this stamp, copper stamp. First mayor of the Luntifia village, Ali Muhammad, in that year. So this goes counter to what we're saying. If this Luntifia was in Malta, but it may have been imported from outside, like the Maimuna stone, very probably was not local, probably came as ballast on some vessel or other. In confirmation of that stamp, this is a modern one, exactly the same. Beir village, first Muhtar in Gaza, 1938. Now, recent archaeological conclusions. Ceramics found at Mdina led Molinari and Kutaya to assert that Mdina was clearly occupied throughout the 11th century and possibly in the late 10th century as well. We have the pollen analysis of 3 cores to bedrock consistent with continued cereal agriculture, wheat, not hafun, wheat, excluding a hiatus in human occupation at any time. These are the 4 gentlemen who wrote the paper. Well into the 10th century, the archaeology of Malta is characterized by large quantities of globular amphorae of probable Eastern Aegean origin, despite being formerly Arab territory, Bruna and Kutaya. So all these things, hopefully with more research, will be fitted in together to bring out more beautiful tapestry. By way of summing up, Arab sovereignty, Arab sovereignty in these islands shrinks to 80 years, from 1048 to 1127. They came in 1048. In 1127, Roger suppressed their domination and implanted a Christian government. Islam survived for 2 centuries, from 1048 to 1250, the expulsion of Muslims to Lucera. So Islam, so this is sovereignty, government, this is religion, Islam. The Arabs and their descendants never left these islands. That's why we're here. Language, culture, personal and toponymic nomenclature, very evident. Christianity survived openly till 1048, apart from possible brief spell after 870. There may have been depopulation, but then the Byzantines must have crept in again, or Gozo was never attacked. Al-Hungary never mentions Gozo. It went underground till 1127, hence the bishop of Tristia and the community, and openly again after. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any comment?
Someone over there?
Prof, using the word Christianity during that period is actually a misnomer. The Orthodox Church ruled.
It's still Christian. Orthodox is Christian.
Well, yes, but
yeah, in 1054 there was the break, schism.
You know, we should kind of give credit to that. until the schism, or after the schism, because the Pope forced the Normans to switch over to their own church.
Sure. But they're still Christian.
The other thing is that Sicily, being much larger than Gozo and Malta, had been overrun by the Arabs, North Africans, for a long time.
Yes.
And so when Islam took over North Africa, obviously they migrated to Sicily. And there in Sicily you have what you described, a lot of mosques having been converted to Christian churches.
Yes.
However, when we say that Malta is, the Maltese language is Arabic, is a misnomer as well. Malta inherited its language from the Sikoro-Berbers, and the Berbers got taken over by Islam.
I agree.
In fact, most Sicilian authors, when they refer to the old Sicilian language, they refer to Maltese as being the original Sicilian language.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Someone else?
When did the Christianity switch from Greek to Latin? I mean, was it at the time of the schism, the Maltese islands said we're going to decide this block rather than the other?
There is mention of a protopapas in 1239.
So they were Orthodox then?
I think so.
So that's what I'm saying. When did they become Latin? Recognizing the Pope? I don't know. I'm not into all this, but you know.
There was a slow process of Latinization. For example, the copy of the Tristia document is authenticated by 4 signatures, 2 of them definitely Greek, and 2 of them definitely Latin from the names. One of them is actually mentioned as the priest who was a father of somebody else. So definitely.
But Greeks could be Latins as well, couldn't they? Greek individuals could have shown obedience to the Pope, because you've still got Greek Catholics.
Yes,
I mean, that's why I find it very confusing. I'm not quite sure what we're dealing with.
There was a slow process of integration.
Because it still is a Greek Catholic church, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Someone else? Yes? Oh.
First of all, thank you, Stanley. It's very interesting. It opens up new possibilities of polemics too.
There'll always be those.
I am not taking sides. I'm not the next issue, but what your interpretation and the documentation is very interesting, I must say. I want to just bring up 3-4 things which are nearer our times, but which coincide with a bit of what you said. First of all, this fact about literary documents being poo-pooed and never not historical. I've been through that in a later period on the Great Siege, La Mantea by 1582, which is an epic poem in Spanish on the Great Siege of Malta, day by day, which said, for the first time I came up when I read it, that La Valette was 67 years old at the time of the siege. That was the first time I saw that, so that would change his date of birth. And then when I went to check on Balbi, English language was one date, different. But the Italian translation was another date. So I said, it's not possible. These are 2 translations of the same thing. I went to the original Balbi, and the original Balbi had not been noticed. Says it, tenía 67 años. So Balbi also says 67. So literary pieces are literary, of course. There can be imagination, fantasy, but it's based also on concrete fact. Second thing is interesting for me, that the motivation disrupting pilgrims and merchants for attacking Rome is exactly the same principal motivation which Suleiman the Magnificent gives in 1564 in his edict, in one of his orders, where he says, I have decided to attack Malta, October 1564. I have decided to attack Malta because they are disrupting the commerce and trade, and Muslims going and pilgrims going for the Hajj passing by Malta. exactly the same of it 200 years later. And the third one, which might interest Scotland a bit more, again, not that little bit later, but which shows devotion in Gozo, is this recent thing which I wrote while I was abroad on holiday on the beach, Googling it, my usual things. And I come across this 2005 article, academic article, which published a 1470 manuscript, a litany of saints, made for mariners, for seafarers. About 160 saints all over the Mediterranean for sailors when they are in difficulty in front of a Mediterranean city, they would invoke the name of the saint of the city to protect them. So they have two lines for the Mediterranean, but one line in front of Malta, Santa Caterina. So in 1470, the saint, the navigators in danger, they would invoke in front of Malta is not San Giuseppe or San Paolo, but Santa Caterina, which is Zeitsu. But we knew about that because we have the 1420 roll. But the most interesting thing for me, and possibly even for you, Stanley, is that it says davanti all'isola di Gozo, Ghozo, San Giovanni, which means that the cult of San Giovanni in Gozo was present already in 1470. And I think, you might correct me because I'm not an expert on this, that up till now we have San Giovanni Sciopia, San Juan. The earliest reference was 1580 till now. But now we go back 110 years and know that San Giovanni was venerated.
You have forgotten that we communicated on this on emails.
Yes.
Very essentially, thank you for the paper.
I sent this one. Yes. Of the manuscript. So you can. Thank you.